The Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks, they continued today. Scott Bessent, he's the nominee for Treasury Secretary, and he's still on the hot seat. So here to dive in for this and what's going on in the markets today is Jim Rickards. He's an investment banker and author of MoneyGPT, AI and the Threat to the Global Economy. So Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. Before we dive into all this, if I'm not mistaken, that looks like the White House behind you. What are you doing there?
Hanging out. It is the White House. I'm just overlooking Lafayette. It's the first time I've been in Washington in about 4 years when I don't feel I'm behind enemy lines. So it's great to be back.
Well, so Bessent and Trump have promised that they're going to create an economic golden age. So what do they need to do to make that happen?
Well, the great thing about Trump and Bessent is they've been very explicit about what they're going to do. We don't have to guess that much. And in particular, of course, Bessent will be Secretary of the Treasury. And he's looked at the national debt situation, which is borderline out of control. When people say, oh, gee, we're never going to pay off the national debt. How are we going to pay off the national debt? You don't have to pay it off. You do have to make it sustainable. That means when old debt matures, you have to issue new debt to pay it off. But you have to be able to do that and basically access the market. And for there, the most important metric is the debt to GDP ratio. How much debt do we have versus how much of an economy do we have to support the debt? Now, 30% is completely comfortable. 60 to 90%, you're on the edge a little bit. Over 90, you're in trouble. The United States is about 130%. So this is the highest ever. I was going to say the highest since World War II, but it's actually the highest ever. And it is not sustainable. Now, again, you don't have to pay it all off at once. What you have to do, the debt will increase. It's not going to go. But if growth is faster than the debt increase, then that ratio starts to go down. And the market really likes to see that. So Bessent's plan is, he said, well, if we can have 3% real growth, and then you're always going to have about 2% inflation. I'm not saying inflation is good, but realistically, the Fed wants 2%. So 3 plus 2 gives you 5% growth, nominal growth. If you can keep the growth of the debt to around 3%, and the economy is growing about 5%, what's happening to the ratio? It's going down. In other words, the growth, which is the denominator, is higher than the debt, which is the numerator. So again, you don't make the debt go away, but you grow faster than the debt's growing. The ratio goes down, and the market really likes that. So it's kind of fifth grade math, at least when I was in fifth grade. But he has a good handle on it, and he's going to make it happen.
I couldn't agree more, Jim, about the feeling in Washington, D.C. It really felt, the feeling for a lot of people like me also was, I didn't want to be there at all. And that has changed. That has changed. Talk to us a little bit about tax cuts. I mean, there's a debate about, how to tie up the legislative package through Congress. There's debate about what that should look like. What are your thoughts about tax cuts moving forward, and do you think that that's attainable?
I do. Now, the key is, as you know, is what's called reconciliation. You can only do it once a year. There's a parliamentarian who says, what can be included or what what cannot be included. But tax cuts definitely fit into the reconciliation budget, the plan. The significance of that is you only need 50 votes plus a tiebreaker. You don't need 60 to break a filibuster or more than that. So the Republicans have 50 votes, or actually 53, if they can keep everybody on board. So they have enough votes to do it. But you can only do it once a year. But of course, in Washington, nothing's that simple. Washington doesn't work. The government does not work on a calendar year. They work on a fiscal year, which actually starts October 1st and goes to September 30th. So we're in one fiscal year now. As of next October, we'll be in another fiscal year. So that gives you 2 bites of the apple, 2 fiscal years in which to do these 2 reconciliation bills. Whether Trump and the Congress want to do 1 or 2, that's kind of an arcane debate. I'll leave that to them. Taxes are definitely a big part of it. And you have to do 2 things. We have a lot of tax cuts from 2017 that are expiring at the end of this year. So those, at a minimum, you have to extend those, or else you're going to get some very large tax increases, which nobody wants. But they want to go beyond that. Trump's looking at increasing the ceiling on state and local tax deductions, the so-called SALT deduction. Should that go from $10,000 to $100,000? That's on the table. And there are other tax cuts as well. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security benefits for retirees, etc. So I started my career. First 10 years, I was a tax lawyer. I was a tax counsel at Citibank, so I know a little bit about it. But I also know it's highly technical. But on the whole, yes, I think we'll extend the expiring tax cuts, introduce some new tax cuts that'll be very good for growth. This isn't just giving away federal money. I mean, it's your money, my money, or the viewers' money. After all, you get to keep more of it, and that's good for investment, good for the economy.
Well, Jim, let's get to DeepSeek. It might be the most Googled word of the day because on Friday, China released their own AI platform that is DeepSeek, and that led to panic, especially in the tech part of the stock market. In the AI bubble, they're worried that might start to pop. Now, Nvidia, which leads the market, dropped by 18% at one point today. It lost $590 billion in market cap. It was the largest in market history. So what do people need to know about the situation?
Well, you were kind enough to mention my new book, MoneyGPT, at the beginning of the segment, but that's all about artificial intelligence. So I've spent the last 2 years researching artificial intelligence, so I'm pretty fresh on the subject. Here's what's interesting. The Chinese DeepSeek is not necessarily better than the artificial intelligence and GPT type applications that we have in the United States, but it is a lot faster. And that's the key. The companies that suffered, Nvidia in particular, are hardware manufacturers. If you can do the same work, faster, faster and with a lot fewer chips, then obviously that's going to hurt the chip manufacturers like Nvidia. Now, that's what it appears to be able to do. I have to question that in the following sense, and the Chinese have a long reputation of cheating in technology, stealing intellectual property, et cetera. Is this thing really just as good, but much, much faster, maybe only, using 10% of the power, the processing power that we use? Or were they able to cheat in the training set? The training set is all the material that the large language models and the artificial intelligence algorithms sort of read, in order to learn how to answer questions and basically interact with humans. Now, the training set can be the entire internet. You can buy the entire internet. I don't know how many billion pages, but it's archived and it's available. And you turn your models loose on that training set, and the computer. It's not really intelligence. It's just it's like a good speed reading plagiarist. But it basically learns which words are associated with other words, how to group them, how to come up with grammatical coherent sentences and replies. And Alexa, Siri are examples of that, but so is a lot else. So that's all true as far as it goes. But did the Chinese did they actually find a way to do that with a lot less processing power, which is a big deal, and that's why Nvidia went down? Or did they somehow cheat on the training set and kind of like it's like basically copying someone else's exam, in other words? So I think we need to learn more about it. It is a dramatic breakthrough. I don't want to say that the Chinese did cheat. I don't know that for a fact. I do know they've done that in other cases. So I think we need to learn more. But on its face, it's not better than ours in terms of output, but it's much better than ours in terms of how many semiconductors, how many processors you need, and that's why Nvidia went down in particular. But we have to learn a lot more.
It's interesting that the nervousness, though, that people had nonetheless, as witnessed today. Could you talk a little bit about China? I mean, AI is one thing, but this is a country whose state of economy is not at its best, and we're entering the Trump era. This announcement is timed in an interesting way, right? Not very long after Trump comes into office. Do you sense volatility on the horizon there, or how do you sort of game out China in the age of Trump, too?
Well, right. I definitely expect volatility in U.S. stock markets. Now, as far as China is concerned, their economy is in deep trouble. And there was one of their prominent economic commentators recently who was he wasn't arrested, but he was told to shut up, basically, because he was speaking candidly about their GDP. They published GDP numbers of around 5%. Now, it wasn't that long ago. It was 10% per year. Now they say 5%. The truth is they're probably closer to 2%, maybe even in a slight recession. They're in terms of simple manufacturing, they're now competing with Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. India's coming on strong. U.S. investment is getting out of China, or at least new investment is not going in. They're anticipating tariffs. Chinese exports are up a little bit right now, but that's because their exporters are racing to get ahead of the tariffs. Who knows when those tariffs are coming? Could be next week, according to some of the things Trump has said. And we talked earlier about the U.S. debt to GDP ratio, how that's really a drag on growth. And it is, and Scott Bessent wants to get that down, and he has a plan to do it. The Chinese debt to GDP ratio is much worse than the United States, and it's a drag on growth as well. They also have a demographic problem. Their workforce is shrinking. People say, well, China's got 1.4 billion people. Well, in about 50 years, they're going to have about 700 million people. They're going to lose 700 million people over the next 40 or 50 years because their birth rate is not anywhere near what you needed. 2.1 is the break. 2.1 births per, say, family is what you need to stay even. China might be around 1, which means that not only is the population shrinking, but you can't even get back to where you were. So they've got demographic problems, they've got pollution problems, they've got debt problems, and the U.S. probably will put big tariffs on their exports. So there are an awful lot of problems in China. They're being glossed over. They lie about it. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that they are communists, the real kind. But it's a huge economy. It's important. You got to pay attention to it. But I think there's a lot less there than meets the eye.
We've been focusing on China. Let's not leave Japan out of this because they did raise rates over the weekend as well. And the last time they did it, normies might remember it in August of 2024 as a flash crash. If you want to Google it, you can look up the yen carry trade. But Jim, how much are we going to have to look at this in impacting global markets?
You have to pay very close attention to Japan for the reason you mentioned, Joe, which is the carry trade. So basically, the carry trade is I borrow in borrow yen at a very low rate. So once I borrow yen, I'm short the yen, and then I can convert it to other currencies and invest, anywhere in the world. And with a low interest rate on the yen and a higher return on whatever I'm investing in, you can make a lot of money and you leverage it. Now, when the Bank of Japan starts raising rates, which they're doing, that carry trade reverses very quickly. So you have to unwind it if you don't want to lose money. So what does that mean? Well, now you've got to basically buy back the yen, close out your position. The banks are going to reduce their balance sheets. You're going to be selling assets to get out of the trade. So it's very dangerous for markets. You're right, that flash crash was closely linked to Japanese rates going up. But they have some of the same problems that China has. Their population shrinking. It's a powerful economy, and Japan has much more high tech than China does. So high tech's an asset. But I spoke to Sakakibara-san. He was a assistant finance minister in the 1980s. His nickname was Mr. Yen. And I said, Sakakibara-san, you've got so much debt. Again, they have like 3 times what the United States has in terms of that ratio. How are you going to manage that? How are you going to pay it off? And he said, Rickards, what you're missing is that our population is shrinking. So our overall statistics are bad, but our per capita statistics are good because the population is shrinking. And I knew what he meant, and technically it's correct. And I said, so what that means is that in 50 years, there's going to be 1 person left in Japan, and they're going to own the whole country. So he didn't think that was too funny. But that's kind of the where they're heading or where their theory is. But they have, again, their demographic headwinds, possible tariff headwinds. What Trump and Bessent and the U.S. trade representatives are saying to Japan, but they're also saying it to China, is, hey, you can sell all the cars and semiconductors and electronics to Americans you want. Be my guest. But you have to make them in the United States. So the whole idea of putting up the tariff wall is so that you have to jump over the tariff wall to be able to sell to the United States. And that's very good for the U.S. I have a lot of people I interact with or debate with, and they say, well, yeah, Jim, yeah, but isn't that going to be bad for Japan or China or developing economies? And my answer is too bad. I mean, we're here to make America great again. If you're Xi Jinping, you should try to make China great again, and so forth. But the U.S. has been the consumer of last resort to the entire world, and those days are over. And U.S. consumption will still, potentially be strong, but you're going to have to make it here if you want to sell it to Americans. And that's the message to Japan and China.
Yeah, that is straight the mandate of, I think, this new administration. I think it's what people voted for. Let's talk about tariffs in the larger sense. I mean, larger political use we see of them in the Trump administration. As you know, Colombia pushed back against Trump's deportation plans at first, even refusing 2 U.S. military flights carrying illegal immigrants, which led Trump to threaten them with tariffs, and Colombia fired back with their own. But as of last night, you have the White House press secretary announcing that Colombia caved and agreed to accept all deportation flights, including those from U.S. military planes. So do you think this sets the tone for deportations programs to other countries? And also, this seems to be of a piece with the tariffs in general. In other words, they're tied in with economics is tied to politics in this administration in a way that I think is unique, at least rhetorically, because usually we separate these things in conservative world.
That's exactly right. And my favorite part of the story, at least as I've heard it, I can't verify, is that Trump did this while he was on the golf course. He ordered the tariffs on the 4th hole, and he got noticed that the Colombians had caved on the 7th hole. But right, and you're exactly right, Matt. Because you're combining two completely different things. What do deportations have to do with tariffs? Well, on the face, nothing. But here they were combined. Now, what it tells you about Trump's use of tariffs. Sometimes it's very good economic policy. People always talk about Smoot-Hawley in 1930 and the Great Depression. Well, that was a failure. I mean, that was a bad time to put on tariffs because the U.S. at the time was producing more than it consumed. We had a trade surplus, and it would have been better to reduce tariffs and get the American consumer, to have access to cheaper goods. Today, the opposite is true. We consume more than we produce, and that difference is our trade deficit. And that's not sustainable, and all those dollars are going overseas. So tariffs are the right policy today. They were not the right policy in 1930. They are the right policy today. Tariffs are neither intrinsically good nor bad. It all depends on the conditions in which you're applying them. But right now, the conditions are exactly right. Now, but with Trump, you never quite know where you stand. So you have Trump. You have tariffs are good economic policy. I think that's right. But they can also be used as a financial weapon. I teach financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College, and there are all kinds of sanctions and account freezes and other things. But tariffs can be used as a weapon. I would say they were in the case of Colombia. I mean, we had a pretty good trading relationship with Colombia. We actually ran a bilateral surplus. But we really hit them where it hurts. It just so happens that everyone thinks about coffee, and that's right, the price of coffee would have gone up. But one of the biggest exports from Colombia are fresh cut long stem roses. Well, guess what? It's Valentine's Day, or almost. And this is like when they ship all the roses that they grow all year. We're going to be heading for the United States in refrigerated planes over the next several weeks. So Colombia, didn't want to suffer that, and who knows what people were going to get for Valentine's presents here in the U.S. But so the timing was perfect. It hit them where they hurt. And they caved. I think but the message is to other countries. The old expression, you hit one or you penalize one as an example to the rest. This is an example to the rest of the world. Kind of don't mess with the U.S. on important issues such as deportation, where they were going to take back their own country. And the president said, you have to treat them with dignity. Well, they shouldn't be put in. The prisoners should not be put in degrading conditions, but where does the dignity come from? These people are criminals. I mean, and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they were targeting terrorists and criminals for starters. I mean, they'll get around to the other, 7 million or so eventually, but the initial deportees are identified as criminals and terrorists. So I don't feel, the fact that they couldn't get a bathroom break or a fresh meal on the plane, I don't have that much sympathy for them.